Welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. I'm your host, Casey Garrett, and together we'll be discovering and learning from inspiring voices of healers, medicine keepers, and visionaries. Every episode, we'll explore the world of health, vibrant wellness, and natural medicine for a new era of human society. Welcome to today's episode. All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm really delighted to share today with three of my favorite people in the field. If we seem a little familiar, it's because we are. And I'm here today with Kyle Buller, Victoria Starr, and Sarah Hope. And I've been hanging out for some time to dive into this topic. And I think this is the perfect three to delve into this. So to frame this episode, many of you who have been with me for some time know that I spent the beginning part of 2025 in Egypt. And Egypt was promised to be, kind of like a psychedelic experience on its own, without the psychedelic, and it certainly lived up to that. And going from temple to temple and sacred site to sacred site, it was a journey. Each temple was an initiation. And one of the things that stood out as a common theme was it was kind of a masterclass in the importance of the breath, the importance of the breath in our healing, in our humanity, and also, interestingly enough, in our spiritual connection. So I learned a different lesson at each temple, whether it was our physicality, sometimes our posture. If you look at figures from that era, all of the people are so upright, they almost look like they're leaning backwards, right? And that is because I was shown to really enhance our ability to breathe properly with a big open front and a strong back. It really optimizes our ability to breathe. And so I'm so excited to share this topic with three who have a deep passion for the breath and breath work. So one of the things I'm so curious to learn about is there's so many different types of breath work. So just like psychedelic work, there's so many different portals into this work. So I'd love for you guys to open up and share, if you will, a little bit about your kind of origin story, how you discovered breath work, how you came to it, and what type or approach of breath work that you work with today. So Vicki, do you want to start off?
Yes. Thanks, Casey. Wow, I had full body chills when you were talking about Egypt anyway, like when you're talking about the breath there, how magical that experience must have been. When I first experienced breath work, I was held in a space in San Diego. I lived there at the time, and I went to this beautiful yoga studio in downtown San Diego, and I had signed up for a breathwork class that I had no idea what I was getting involved in. I literally told myself I was going to do something new. I signed up, and it was really interesting because I could feel this pull, this ebb and flow of within my body of like, go, don't go, go, don't go. And I walked into the space of the yoga studio, and there was probably 40 other humans in that room. And I'm like, oh shit, what have I just gotten myself into? I had absolutely no idea, and sat down next to this beautiful soul that really welcomed me. And for the next 45 minutes, I went through what is called the 3-part conscious connected breathing pattern. So it's all done in a musical journey. There are affirmations. We started with a guided meditation. We dropped into the breath. And for those of you that don't know, this is 2 inhales in. So it's all done through the mouth. So it's into the diaphragm, into the belly, into the heart, and then out, all done in and out through the mouth. So it's really this beautiful circular pattern. You can go as big as you want, or you can go as soft as you want. But within that space of that yoga studio with all these other humans breathing in this capacity, I literally left the building feeling like I was floating on air. I had full body goosebumps everywhere, and I just felt so euphoric. And the first time I experienced an altered state of consciousness, honestly, that I really was able to recognize. So from there, I was getting ready to move to Costa Rica. And I asked the instructors, the guides, I'm like, do you do this online? I've got to have more of this medicine. Like, this feels so good. And this was pre-COVID. And they said, nope, sorry, bye. And thankfully, moving forward, that was one of the nice things that came out is like we're able to be in community and spaces online. And so I got to go through a deep immersion with them. And at that time, midlife, I recognized that this was all new to me, and I really stepped into my sovereignty. I really recognized where I was abandoning myself, and this breath practice had the ability for me to learn how to trust myself and learn how to, what is my intuition, let alone what does it feel like. And so that was the first time in my life at midlife where I experienced something so much more profound than I ever realized was possible. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks, Casey. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sarah, do you want to go next?
I'm filled with a lot of hope hearing Victoria's story. My gateway into breathwork was chronic pain. So for most of my adult life, I'd had a childhood spinal injury, or like a tumor in my spinal cord, and caused a lot of nerve damage. And so I had a lot of pain in my hips, referral pain going down to my foot, and it was debilitating at times. And I also discovered breathwork by accident. Before I started even my psychedelic journey, I was kind of deep in with Tibetan Buddhism. And I went on a retreat. Actually, I went on a retreat as a translator. And I got to be part of the meditation. And when we were doing like the breath, it was a lot of focus on the breath, but there was something we were doing that was like breathing into the lower portion of the body and the hips. And it was like the first time in my life where I realized that I had agency there in my hips and psoas, and that I could actually work with the consciousness in my lower body. That was totally new to me. I felt really kind of like helpless and in the dark with that pain. And I was like the type of person that like doctor was like, here's a pain clinic. And I'm like, never. And so through that, I came to be teaching myself how to work with my own body and work with the consciousness in my body and the pain. And then I had this massive sort of like breakthrough experience where I was up at altitude on New Year's Day. And I don't know how long ago, it was like maybe 5-6 years ago, where I was having that pain and I was working with it. And I just happened to be at 9,000 feet. And I had like a total blast off. It was like every bit as much like a DMT experience or a psychedelic experience. Like my body turned blue and transparent and was like kind of like doing this pulsing thing. And I was astonished and like really a little scared at first, but also empowered by that. And I at that moment I was like, this is my medicine. Like I'm going there. So I spent the next kind of like 5-6 years sort of developing my modality, and I also trained in breathwork. So yeah, it was my pain body that invited me into breathwork.
I know a lot of people are listening, going to relate to that. Yeah. Thank you. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, everybody. And really interesting to hear the similarity around agency, because I think that was a big takeaway for myself as well. It's like a technique that I think promotes agency in your own process, which is really nice. I was doing my undergrad in transpersonal psychology back in like 2010, wanting to study psychedelics. And my school was very unique. I kind of called it like Hogwarts, where like you could just do so much cool stuff there. I'm like studying psychedelics, and you could create like these independent studies. And there was a 1-credit weekend workshop in holotropic breathwork. And I knew about Stan's work, Stan Groff, because that's what got me like into studying transpersonal psychology. But a lot of the books that I read from him didn't mention breathwork. It was mostly about his LSD research. And so I didn't really have too much like knowledge around like what the technique consisted of, but some of the other students were down at the workshop and retreats before and said, this is such a psychedelic thing. And I didn't really think much of it because I had some really profound psychedelic experiences. I had a near-death experience when I was 16 and still processing a lot of that stuff. And when I went down there, I had a full-blown kind of like mystical experience, reliving my birth, reliving these really potent psychedelic experiences. And I just kind of like stepped away from that, just thinking like, how could you breathe in a room with people with music that could like foster these, psychedelic states? And all my psychedelic experiences, like I still come back to that experience of like integration because it was just so profound, and I still think about it. So my training is in that holotropic lineage. I trained with Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson. They're based out of Vermont. They were holotropic trained colleagues of Stan and Christina. And then they kind of branched off and started doing their own thing. So they call it dream shadow transpersonal breathwork. So I've been with them for, I guess, almost going on 16 years. And yeah, it's been such a profound modality and technique. And I think, again, the big thing that came back to me was like the sense of agency. I think I was doing a lot of escaping with psychedelics. And like falling into breath work reminded me that, I have a body and I need to like process this through my body, not always through my mind. And so I think that was a big thing for me, and I just got really interested in it. I'm like, this feels like my medicine as well, as you guys are saying. So.
Oh, thank you. I love it. And I had the opportunity, I interviewed Joe and Kyle for the podcast together before as the founders of Psychedelics Today, and learned that Psychedelics Today, your roots were actually wanting to talk about breath work. Right?
That was a big motivation for like starting it, was like bringing the breathwork conversation into the psychedelic narrative, and also kind of distorting like our teachers' work. That was a really big move for it.
Oh, love that. Love that. Let's talk about the overlap between psychedelics and earth medicine work and breath work, because that is going to be a top question for all of our listeners. I know when they start microdosing in our community, a lot of people top of mind is, what are some of the other modalities and lifestyle practices I can do to support my psychedelic work? So I'd love for you guys to touch on that of how you approach bringing breath work into psychedelic work. Kyle, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. Guess for like a little bit of the history around like holotropic breathwork. So Dr. Stan Grof was a Czechoslovakian American psychiatrist, and he was pioneering LSD in Czechoslovakia, and then came over to the United States, did some research. All that got shut down. And while he was at Esalen, he was a scholar in residence, writing his books. And they asked him, maybe you could put a workshop together. And so he came back to the breathwork. Towards the end of some psychedelic sessions, he noticed people would start intensely breathing, and it would bring them back into the experience for resolution. And then there's also a lot of like breathwork stuff going on there, like yogis and shamans and stuff rolling through there. And so they ended up developing this technique. So that lineage is really, I always say, like rooted in psychedelics, because Stan is really kind of bringing his clinical expertise in psychedelics there. The way I've kind of been thinking about it more and more over the years is using breathwork as a way for preparation and integration, and also the navigation. So using different styles of breathing depending where you're at. I really see breath as a vehicle. And so, I think a question I get often is like, can I do psychedelics and do holotropic breath work? You probably don't need to deeply go through that process of like intensifying your breath because you're already there. So, you could do that a little bit, or, I think a lot of people end up getting more into like deep, slow breathing for like that parasympathetic activation to help them like regulate when they're having a really difficult experience. So I see it as like, for my master's thesis, I was kind of thinking about this, like, how can we like take this long form intensified breath work practice and like really cater it to like where people are at. And so it was, I started taking more of a trauma-informed approach to it, and I apply that to psychedelics. So like I've used like short, intensified breathing for preparation to see like how people will respond and start building a little bit of that like resiliency before going in. And then, I think people naturally will start breathing what they have a practice when they are going through psychedelic experiences, and it might get really intense. And then on the other side, you could use that for integration to like maybe bring things back up if there wasn't any sort of resolution during their process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vicky, What are your thoughts?
So I love using microdosing psilocybin with the breathwork practice. So the 3-part conscious connected breath is the modality that I most generally hold for my clients because it has the ability to have that DMT release within the body. And so I like to see as breathwork is the doorway and microdosing is the key, where the microdosing helps the ego mind, those subconscious patterns, to be rerouted and to shift and change your patterns. And the breath work tends to like integrate that into the body, the physical aspect of the body. So as humans, we store stuff, trauma, past experiences within the body. So within this breath modality that I facilitate, that it helps to get rid of, like I'm seeing like hips. Women, we tend to hold so much in our hips, whether it's from having child or trauma, whatever. But within this breath practice, we can move the power of the breath through the body, and the microdosing allows that subconscious mind to let go, to soften, so that the experience can be released. It's never about reliving the trauma. It's really about seeing it from a different perspective, maybe as the observer. And that's where the microdosing, the psilocybin comes in, is like we have this ability to see those past experiences and not attach to them and change those neurological pathways within the brain so that we don't stay in that same looping pattern. So they blend so beautifully together. And the women that I held space for, sexual abuse, like she was able to use these two modalities together to let go of the throat chakra, because so much was stored within the throat of having, as a child, a little girl, to keep her voice quiet. And so the two together, they blend just this beautiful synergy and this beautiful harmony together.
Thank you. Yeah. Sarah, how about you?
Psychedelics and breath work, I feel like are, belong in the same family. That people are so surprised sometimes that just with breath that they're seeing fractals and visuals, and they're having a somatic release. I do work with medicine when I'm doing breath work with people. Almost everybody that I guide for or that I sit with, I'll go through a breath work practice first. And it tells me a lot about their window of tolerance and their readiness. And so I'll work with microdose. Sometimes I work with cannabis too, especially a lot with women who have had sexual trauma. It's a very, very powerful experience. But again, we've been talking about agency, and that when somebody realizes that they can reach that state with their own breath, I think a big light switches on. There's a big switch, like that people feel like they have agency. And we say a lot in psychedelics, I'm a licensed facilitator now, and we say you are the medicine. And I don't think that people always understand what they mean, but after a breathwork session, they definitely understand what you are the medicine means. I do a lot of like women's circles and women's groups with live music. Sometimes with like this like silent disco style, with like everybody gets headphones. I also do a lot of breath work and attunement in nature with women. And, we know that trauma informed, anything that's trauma informed knows that too much, too soon, too fast is traumatic. And sometimes that, like a psychedelic experience, while it has implications for trauma healing, isn't the best first step, right? The breath has the ability to help us learn how to be in our sympathetic nervous system with agency, how to get into our parasympathetic nervous system on purpose so that we're not like on a ride. We're not on our nervous system's ride, but we're actually driving. So, I think they are a really beautiful pairing. And I think that breathwork as a standalone practice is also a completely valid practice, valid expanded state experience.
Thank you. That perfectly sets up my next question and inquiry for you guys, which is, especially in the psychedelic space, there's so much emphasis on the big, huge experience, right? The big experience. And there's such power, as we know, in the subtle realms and working gently and working over time and all of the advantages of that. So I'd love for you to share, and any reflections that you have, like working real time with clients, about how, when someone is best served by working at the slower, subtle levels versus kind of the huge experiences. Kyle, let's start with you.
Sarah brought up the window of tolerance, and I think that is a really good point of like just seeing where somebody's at when they're talking about certain things and what they're able to like hold in their nervous system. When I was going through my somatic program, I was reading some Peter Levine, and I think he had something in one of his books about like the quote unquote primal therapies that came out of Esalen actually re-traumatize people. And I remember like sitting with that and like kind of getting like triggered by it, obviously, because like holistic breath work comes out of Esalen and all that stuff. And I had to sit with it and like bring it inside and go, yeah, I think there were so many times like during my psychedelic experiences that like I always said if I wasn't dying and I like didn't like leave my body during a psychedelic experience and I wasn't doing it right. And even with breath work, like trying to push to have these really big cathartic experiences. And it hit me. I'm like, I actually think I like caused too much trauma in my system that I actually like couldn't tolerate. And so I think it is a really important conversation when we're talking about psychedelics and, intensified breathing that facilitates catharsis, that it doesn't need to be big all the time. Our nervous system just can't really handle it. And sometimes, maybe we don't realize like the impact that it has on us until like maybe down the line, be like, oh, wow, I was actually like spending all those months actually trying to recover from this like really traumatic thing that I pushed myself through. And I think it's a challenge for like the culture to like maybe view that at times, because there is such an emphasis on the high dose mystical experience, like Terrence McKenna talking about like 5 dried grams by yourself and blow your ego out and like all that stuff. And yeah, even in the breathwork world, right? It's like there is sometimes an emphasis on having these big cathartic experiences. And I always like to remind people that like you don't always need that. Like sometimes rest is the medicine. And if you have a big breathwork session and you fall asleep, awesome. Like maybe you actually needed that. And we don't always need to chase these really big experiences.
Thank you. Victoria.
Thanks, Kyle. That was really, really beautiful, because like it's important, I feel, to have a guide that is in tune to how the perceived version of you are at that moment in time, to go into the space with my client and say, okay, where are you at in life? I recently have a client that she's going through a divorce, and her nervous system cannot handle at any point that big cathartic experience. And so it's always having that intention going into the client space and saying, where are you at? What's present within you? Because I want to create this safe space for you. That's what's most important for your nervous system. And it's very interesting to see when somebody is in that fight or flight, like it's that invitation for us as facilitators to invite them into that slow pattern. And maybe it isn't that 3-part conscious connected breathing pattern or holotropic. Maybe it's simply a box breathing, or maybe it's alternate nostril breathing to settle their nervous system and then to guide them slowly into that experience, changing the playlist to where that playlist isn't that, pound your fist on the bed experience, but it's just that slow, soft, subtle, where you can feel safe to be in your body. And then it's always interesting because I see that towards the end of the journey, like they automatically do somatic release. They're automatically in tune to their body and inviting in that moving of the hips or shimmying of the shoulders, and then allowing just that nervous system to soften and to be held in that safe space. And what Kyle said is that I always receive when a client has fallen asleep during a session, it's like, yes, I've done my guidance appropriately for exactly what their body needs. And so that is a gift to me, being that space holder for them.
Beautiful. Sarah.
Yeah, I really love that we're talking about the subtle medicines and the subtle experiences. Even though breath work isn't always subtle, people can be really surprised that it can be a peak experience. But, what comes to me is like peak experiences are valid, but when we're constantly chasing peak experiences, we're not really experiencing like the gestalt, the whole of what it is to be. We're not experiencing the coherence. I like to use the word coherence, and especially I like to use the word mythic coherence, like what is the whole of who we are. And we are living on planet Earth. And one of the most beautiful things about planet Earth is that it's full of these subtle medicines, medicines that are carried in the trees, medicines that, gently guide us towards our masculine or our feminine. And those are highly nuanced medicines, as is the breath. Victoria's talking about Nadi Shodhana, the alternate nostril breath or a parasympathetic nervous system breath. And I've had people where I felt guided. All my breathwork sessions are channeled, and I felt guided the whole time to never bring people to a peak. And I've had people say like they went deeper than they ever had before in that parasympathetic state. They took a parasympathetic journey, and it's subtle does not mean that it's not strong or potent or powerful.
Thank you. Excellent. For people listening that might be brand new to breathwork, I'd love for you guys to share kind of some real world experiences with people in breathwork. It might be with a group or an individual. I'd love to start with you, Sarah, because I know you recently went into the community in Minnesota during a really difficult time to provide breath work to that community. So I'd love for you to reflect on what that was like.
Yeah, I as soon as you said that, I just felt like a rush of like tears come to my face. So I hope that I can transmit what that was like. I was invited to go to Minnesota to a church that that holds sound baths and like wellness spaces for the community. It was a beautiful, beautiful old church. And I was invited there to do that before any of the ICE chaos started to go down in Minneapolis. But I will say I am from Minneapolis. I was raised in Minneapolis. I grew up there. And so I was motivated to go and share breath with the community. And then I started to happen, and the women, I started to be occupying Minnesota, and things started to become really heated. And the facilitator asked me if I was still coming. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely coming. And things intensified more and more. So much so that the day that it was 20 below, and I mean, if you know any Minnesotans, like these are some fierce people, like they are out there. It's like there were 50,000 people in the street, and Matt and I just were arriving to the airport, and there's this like massive expression on this protest. And it was beautiful because it is ass cold. I don't know if I can say that on your podcast, but like if you have been in like 20 below weather in downtown Minneapolis, it is so cold. Like it's otherworldly. So we were there on that day, and then we spent most of the day like setting up the church. My DJ that I usually work with that travels, he was going to Columbia and he wasn't able to go with me, so I had to like learn to do the DJing, and the whole setup was my very first DJ experience. But the group came and they were carrying the energy of that day, and here we were in this like sanctuary that we were. And we went into grief. So I went into grief and collective grief. And, the colors and the energy and the sparks that I was seeing coming off the group was so potent, so beautiful. And I was crying the whole time. I don't know how to wrap this up with a bow, and maybe it doesn't need to be wrapped up with a bow, but I would say that like we have been talking about people breathing together and the power of that. And once in a while, when I'm doing that with people, I just get this vision of like human beings in a massive cave, like sitting together in the dark, breathing together. And that's why I think it took us to like this really like primal space of togetherness, of breath, of quiet, of dark, of fire, and grief. So yeah, that's pretty intense. I'm honored to have been able to do that, and honored to be able to collectively hold grief while all of that was going on. Alex Preddy was shot the next morning. In very not far from the neighborhood where we were staying, and it was devastating. Still not sure really how to digest that, but I do feel like if we can be there, if we can show up and breathe with people as we're going through what we're going through, that's really powerful.
Thank you so much. I think these stories of real world are so important for people to hear, especially those of us inside the psychedelic field. We talk a lot about the laws and who said what and what's going on. And it's like, when it comes down to it, it's like, it's bringing this work to communities and then having them empower themselves to share it with others is kind of the heart of why we do this work, truly. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, beautiful. Victoria, how about you? Do you have any clients or stories you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Thanks for holding that space too, Sarah. Can't imagine it was easy. So processing that. For the past 4 years, I've been living full-time in my van. I travel across the country and with my chocolate lab, Olivia. And one of the communities that I've gotten really involved in is the RV community and the van life community. And there are a lot of experiences within those two communities where we have come together on the earth and in the sacred land of Palm Springs, Palm Desert area, and like those rocks there and those elements there, and seeing and witnessing. It was a van life community of, I think, 50, 60 women. And to see them lay on the ground, on the earth, and allow me to hold them so that they can process whatever they're moving through, because we're all navigating this human experience at different levels and different spaces and times. And to witness them breathe together in this potency and this power together on the earth and on the land, and allowing just the breath to be enough at whatever pace it is best for them, was really, really magical, Casey, because what I heard and no one else heard is that in the background we were near a shooting range, a gun range, and there was gun practice going off in the back. And like, they were so dropped in and so immersed in their experience and on the land. It was just really, really potent to be able to witness these women who, a lot of them didn't know each other, and to come together in this harmony and this beautiful capacity to have this energetic connection, this interconnectedness between them all, and the earth. And that was just divine.
Beautiful. Kyle, how about you?
As you both are talking, I'm just even kind of like reflecting on my own experience with like breath work. And there's a quote that I read quite often. And I think it kind of like wraps up my perception of this work in a way. And it comes back to like community and grief and like being able to like hold that. And something I say, it's like the breathwork community I've been part of, it actually stopped being about the breathwork practice, and it started being more about the people, and like just going there to show up and hold each other in that way. So maybe I'll read this quote. This is by Martine Prachtel. It comes from this book, The Smell of Rain on Dust, all about grief and praise. And he says, "There's many traditions of grief among the peoples of the world. Throughout the planet, at any moment, anywhere, you could be part of some of the most amazing sequences, the form that grief takes. In some places, it's this way. In others, it's that way. In every case where grief and praise are still honored, there's one aspect that remains the same with all people. Grief, even for an individual loss, is a thing that a lot of people are necessary. A tribe is necessary, even if it's to be some kind of resilient, non-judgmental basket against which the griever is able to thrash. And I love that quote because I think like you kind of see that in breathwork sessions where like the big catharsis comes up and you have a container to thrash against. Like I always say, like without that container, like I felt like I didn't have much place to quote unquote like act my neuroses out. And so just that image of like having that container, a human basket just to thrash against, has been my experience. And he says, I doubt if anybody's relatives could be that for us. A tribe lets us say things we may or may not believe, be filled with the grief in whatever form it takes without hurting ourselves or anybody else. Unworried that the sometimes uncharacteristically expressive being we might turn into, when in the necessary state of grief, will be held against us when the blessing of life has healed, and we can continue slowly returning to a more regular flow. So real communities are necessary for the people to grieve in a real way. In a real tribe, there's no secrets. Everybody knows everything about everybody and in an exaggerated form. They simply aren't ashamed of their changeable, proud natures. Are there any real communities like that in the modern condition, where your love of whom or what you've lost could fully praise what you miss with real grieving that isn't just some vacant unloading in an anonymous therapy group? Maybe there are, but for most people, they're left alone to swallow their grief and just get on with it. And yeah, I think like my experience in my breathwork community and world has been that, where it's like, here's a container. Has turned into much less about the technique and the practice, but it's about the people that really know me deeply. I think about something that's really nice where you're able to build that over years and years. It's like, me and these same folks are breathing for over a decade plus together, and getting to know these stories, and really knowing the core of people. And that's really beautiful. And, it's like, yeah, I'm glad that I feel really blessed to have had that container. I miss it now that I'm like, halfway across the country and they're in Vermont. But, what that community has meant to me has been pretty much everything.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. All three of you. So beautiful. Actually, my next question was around the container. A lot of times people in my programs, that's the first time they're encountering that concept. They ask me a lot. They're like, well, you would say container. What does that actually mean in the context of working with earth medicines or breathwork practices? So I'd love to hear your reflections on why have a container. It's similar to the question of, can I practice with earth medicines myself? Why does a guide, why does a community, why does a group make such a meaningful difference to the experience? Yeah, Sarah, do you want to start first?
Yeah, container. The first thing that comes to mind is that a container sort of invites people out of the Muggle world into the magical world, the divine. So even if I'm doing a breathwork on Zoom, I'll call in the directions before, I'll burn things, I'll set the altar, I'll set a candle on the altar and set up the space, because we're inviting somebody deeper into themselves. And in order to go, I think, deeper into ourselves safely, we do need a container. We need a sacred container to do that in. So, whether it's like casting a circle that I learned to do, as a pagan woman, calling in the directions, creating the group field, I would say, an individual, myself, and another person could be a container, and in that container could be like the trees and their energetic field, the trees that are in my yard, the animals that are in the neighborhood, even the bugs and the plants that are in the house can be in that container, and the earth can be in that container, and the sky can be in that container, and we can designate that for what needs to be there for this consciousness to happen, for us to feel safe to thrash if we need to, or to emote, or to cry. A group container, I think, is really important to talk about too, because I think we've all seen that go sideways, right? With groups, when we're opening a space where our neuroses can emerge, our neuroses can also emerge onto each other. And so the order and the safety of the group field is so important. And if I'm doing a retreat or something like that, I'm spending the first day working on the group field, with dyads, and what can we do to create trust, and as you know me, Casey, I work a lot with nature, so like what role are the trees playing to support us, the weather, the air, the ancestors. So I think, absolutely, to name that the container is important and sacred, and we have to tend it really, really well. And, group work can be so, so powerful, but I still have a healthy fear of group work. I'm fully admitting it. I will step into it, but I have, been part of leading groups that went sideways when people's neuroses, came forward, and it feels terrible. And so I think, the strength of that container and the willingness and the ongoing commitment is super important.
Honest, as always. Thank you. Yeah, Victoria.
I really feel that I'm just going to circle back to that trust, creating that sacred space, that trust as the space holder, and connecting with each individual on a level that they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel loved. And always, like, there's we've talked about this before, the masculine and the feminine, the energetics of the space is like, how do we create that safety and that trust? Well, here are the expectations. Here's what you may experience. Here's how this person may be different from you. And so creating that nest that feels really good for them, and, inviting in, have them bring their favorite blanket or their favorite feels that allow them to feel nurtured in that space, in that group container. And that's where they get to be able to release and to let go. And what I've experienced in the group containers together is that generally when one person begins to cry, there's going to be a ripple effect within the room, within that space, because it's given that brave person, that courageous person has given everyone else the invitation to let go, to release, to soften. And also, I love bringing in a sacred laugh. If that experience happened in the beginning, at the end of the journey, that breathwork experience is like, let's bring in that laughter. Let's bring in that joy. And maybe they don't feel it. That's the invitation. If it doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to. That's that safe space that you set up. But that laughter at the end just changes the dynamics and allows it to be just so much freer for everyone together as a collective. Yeah.
Wonderful. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, groups can be scary. So yeah, thanks for naming that. It's a lot of energy to contain, and you never know what's going to show up there. And groups aren't for everybody either, right? Like, some people have been really traumatized in groups, and we also have to like honor that and think about like what container feels right for somebody. Maybe it is an individual session, and then I think like the other side of groups, I think that when I started doing more group stuff, I was like terrified. And I think it kind of hits on our primal fears of like being rejected from a group. But the opposite of that is like finally maybe being seen, heard, and witnessed by others in that like non-judgmental space. And that can be really, really healing for a lot of folks. But the container too, I think we need to be really mindful of like how we create those containers, how to create safe spaces for people to show up. I think that really acts as a place to like contain the energies. Like, I'm just reminded about like, I was on a psilocybin retreat in Jamaica, and somebody had to go outside, and I walked them outside. And as soon as we left that building, it was like opening ourselves up to like all the energetics of like the world. And like, you could definitely feel the difference of like what it felt like inside versus like outside. It was like outside, you're getting like, the cars, all the noise, like you're feeling the energy from all the people. And it's like being able to just be inside when like, you create that container, it's like you're protected from all that in a way. And hopefully like the facilitators are creating those energetic boundaries for like, the outside world to not come in there. And I've felt that in breathwork too, like get up and leave to go to the bathroom, and I'm outside that like container, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And so, I think that the container that we create really helps to like contain the energy and creates that sacredness of the experience. And that itself, like, you don't sometimes even need medicine or breath, right? It's like the energy of the room, energy of the container can start to just elicit all sorts of different things for folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At the time we're recording this, I'm just finishing our first week of our group immersion program. And I received so many messages after their first initial call together from each person in the group saying they realized that the other women in the group are just as much medicine as the medicine part of the experience. And they can really see and feel why they were all brought together in this experience. And so it's beautiful, especially with medicine work, as you can see how the medicine works with the individual, but also I have witnessed many, many times the medicine works through the group and the relationships and interactions between the group participants as well, bringing people together into the container. Yeah, awesome. Awesome. I'd love to touch on, I don't know about you, but I've certainly seen this so much in my own practice in groups, is big grief coming up. I'm working a lot right now with people who've had significant loss in their life. They have lost spouses, they've lost children that have grief at such a depth and level. They've done so much talk therapy and the groups and the programs. They often come to me and they're like, I'm doing all the things, but I just feel stuck. I feel capped at where I can take my healing from here. And then they meet medicine and they meet the breath, right? And it helps them access these deeper layers of grief. So I'd love for people who are listening and haven't stepped into these practices yet to speak to grief and loss in your own practice and how breath work and or psychedelics can work specifically with grief. Yeah. Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah. The first thing that comes up for me is that my husband Matt and I were students of grief last year. We really, like, the whole year was, I felt that we, as a couple, were being led by grief. Matt's father passed. Our beloved cat passed. I know you, Casey, are an animal person. I know you know what that's like. And yeah, there was so much loss. And, during COVID, my husband, who has had a lot of anxiety, learned breath work. We both did, because we're like, what do we do? What are we doing here? What do we do? We needed something. He learned breath work. And I would say that for us, as working through what we were working with in the family, like when the patriarch of the family dies, like, that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big portal. Breath was primary in the household. It's one of the main ways that we got through that together. And then, the death of our cat and changes in our family, you reach a certain age and your parents will die. And so, like, that's really real for us right now. And then there was the grief in the world. And so last year, all year long, actually in one of my peyote ceremonies, the peyote told me that I was a student of grief at this time. And that really tracks. So I would say that breath and grief are, I don't know, they're just totally together in my mind. Like, I don't think I could even know how to start doing grief if it weren't for the breath. And then the collective co-regulation, like having gone to Minneapolis and created a rhythmic trance inside of the grief with the breath together, is so powerful. Like, we weren't meant to do breath alone. It's never made sense to me that we would go to, like, the funeral for the loss of a loved one and then go back into our little boxes and grieve alone. Like, that seems really off to me. But I do think that we're inherently designed to co-regulate, to breathe together, to cathart together, like to have a catharsis of the emotions. And we're meant to do that as a collective. And if you hear, a group of 50 people breathing together and grieving and, moving through what's happening in the world and in their bodies, that's, I think that could take us back to, where we need to be as human beings to do what we're doing here. We become lost, we become isolated, but it's a common denominator. We all breathe and we all have the power of breath. So, Yeah, breath and grief are part of the same, the same continuum in my world.
Lovely. Victoria, how about you?
Oh, Casey, I just want to name that like grief can come in so many different levels. There isn't it's all around us. It's part of our human experience. And it could be grief from changing careers. It could be grief from getting a divorce or starting a new chapter in your life. You're a mama and your ducklings have fled the coop, so you're now an empty nester. Your grief comes in so many different levels. And one of the most powerful experiences that I've witnessed was last year. I went on a backpacking retreat for a psilocybin journey. I was a sitter, and I got to bring breathwork in for the day before. And it was really beautiful to have the breathwork experience, to sync them together in their own differences and their own griefs, because there was a woman that had lost her husband. There was a woman that were all navigating different things. And so the breath brought them this interconnectedness together with the land and with each other. And then the next day was the journey. And to witness each one of them and their own experience with plant medicine in their journey, and being able to come back to the breath when they were grieving whatever they were processing through. Like, that was the beauty of the two together. And like I said before, it's like breathwork is the doorway and microdosing plant medicine is the key. So it's the two just blend so beautifully together, and holding and witnessing how it can heal, and how people are able to move through their experiences in their life and to be supported by both modalities.
Thank you. Thank you. Kyle, how about you?
Think about I think it's in Chinese medicine. There's probably some other traditions too, like grief's correlated to the lungs. And how much do we store there? And I think there's that interconnectedness between the breath and grief and the lungs. Everything that I just kind of mentioned before with that quote by Martine. I think it's just to come together for these experiences, to have a place to grieve, and whatever that looks like, right? Like, as you're saying, Victoria, grief comes in many forms and shapes and expressions. But yeah, do we really have a lot of these containers in our culture to really properly grieve? I think about a story he shares in that book too, where somebody's grieving about the loss of his mother, and they're at their funeral, and part of his practice is just crying and collapsing on the floor, letting grief move through you in that way, to help the spirit move on. And this guy was just getting so caught up in the grief, and he turns and there's an ambulance there, and realizing that the ambulance was for him, realizing and asking why did this happen? And the family was like, we thought you were going crazy, we thought you were losing it, and so we didn't think you were going to hold it together. And so I think in our culture, it's we don't always have these containers to really let ourselves crumble at times, right? It's get your shit together, right? Don't feel that. And so I think that's the power of these communities coming together to do breath work or psychedelics, and creating those containers to have a place. And also managing expectations too, I think is important. I think about folks that come to either workshops or whatnot, and they have an expectation that they're going to grieve about something, and then they get upset when they don't get that grief, right? Maybe they had another experience unfold. And, I think that's also important to let that not always have that expectation I need to cry and get this out of my system. Maybe something else is moving through you that needs to move through. You guys brought up the pandemic, and it was 2 years of not doing breath work. And my first breath work session back is oh man, there's so much to grieve about. There's so much stuff to get out of my system, stress and anger and anxiety and all the fear. And I fell asleep for 2 hours during that. And I was expecting to like rage out and like, process that grief, that collective grief that we were all kind of probably feeling during that time. And just realizing like, yeah, I think I just needed to rest. Like my nervous system was like on high alert. We were all kind of like fight or flight for like 2 years, probably for most people. And it just provided a container to just, let that process unfold in a different way. And so, I think again, it like comes back to like that conversation around like catharsis and like, does it always need to be big, or can it also look subtle too? And that's just as important.
Thank you all so much. Just listening to you all and reflecting, it just reminds me how important and how supportive it is to have a guide beside you in these experiences, because so much of it is unexpected. And so much of it is like what happens, whether it's with breath work or with medicine, when you don't get what you want. Sometimes that's the greatest medicine of all. And it's that reflection and understanding. I had a client I was working with the other day, and they had practiced with medicines before and came back to it, and they could not believe how much they were grieving. They were just having catharsis of tears again. And they're like, wow, more of this, more. I didn't know there was more, and I don't really have anything I'm grieving. And when we sat with it, we realized she was grieving her former life. Like a lot of people are really coming into their own right now, are really claiming a new identity, or reclaiming who they have always been in a new way at a new level. And we don't realize, we're grieving who we used to be sometimes, or who the choices we made when we were the person before us, right? And that has its own grieving process too, of release and letting go. So it's so beautiful to have these containers of reflection to help us through these moments. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. I would love for you to share a little bit about your approach to breath work. If you have anything coming up for people who might be wanting to learn breath work. We have a lot of healers and guides in our community who might want to incorporate breath work into their work and offering. So anything you'd love to share about your approaches and anything you have coming up later on in 2026. Kyle, let's start with you.
I don't think I have too many like public workshops or anything like that coming up. I've been kind of busy managing our other training program, but hopefully that is open soon, and we'll start planning some more public workshops. If folks do want to reach out, I am always open for like individual kind of breath work online. If folks are interested in like understanding a bit of my approach with psychedelics, we do have a course on that, of like going through like the prep, navigating, and the integration with breathwork. But my approach has like really shifted over the years too. Like I think I was mentioning, like I've been studying like that holotropic dream shadow lineage for about like almost 16 years. And my thinking around the big catharsis, big experiences has shifted. And so I try to like really, I'll host those for sure. And I think there's a time and place for it. And I really love those like long weekend workshops, but also just individualizing the breath for folks and seeing where like people are at. Like I just had somebody yesterday, and they wanted to do breath work. And, I just asked them like, where's your nervous system at? Like, what do you think you need right now? Do you need to like just relax, or does it feel like things want to get activated? And so really starting to like, tailor the breath around where somebody is at. And not always, focusing on the big experiences. So my approach has like shifted over the years, which, I think is important to also like question, where we're come from and how it can evolve and maybe, shift. I'll leave it at that.
Oh yeah. You're not alone. I think we all relate to that. Absolutely. Victoria, how about you?
Thanks, Casey. So I am getting ready I am launching the Wisdom Wheel. It is a 7-week microdosing container for people who are curious about microdosing. And what I weave into that is different breath patterns, different modalities, different styles each week. So we'll experience, what's coming up during the microdosing, and then also I'll drop you into, or the group into, maybe it is that 4 in, 7 out. It's calming the nervous system, and then there is a final breathwork ceremony with it's closing the container with the conscious connected breathwork, so we can integrate what you experienced in those 7 weeks. And then also, my individual containers, they include the breathwork and microdosing, and they're 3 months in length, because I never feel that. I feel like we've been on this planet for a while, and our patterns and our traumas have happened over a lifetime so far. So it's going to take time to release and get to the root of what you're holding on to, because I think Kyle already said this, is that it's maybe not, or Casey, maybe you said it, it's not hours that we're holding on to. It could be generational. And so how can we let go of that? And that takes time, so that we can be the ripple effect. Specifically for me, is for my daughter, for her children, and so on. So that takes time. And those are those individual 3-month containers that I like to hold with the modalities of both. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah. I regularly take clients. I love working with couples. Since Matt and I have this experience of like transforming our marriage through learning to co-regulate. I work a lot with couples. I work with like mothers and daughters. Is a passion area of mine. People who need to learn to co-regulate their nervous systems, to move trauma up and out. So always open to working with individuals, families, couples. I also have somatic euphoria coming up. So over the years, from the, way back when I discovered agency in my body, through the meditation training, Tibetan Buddhism training, until now, I've created somatic euphoria as a modality. And so I have a training coming up May 28th to the 31st. It's in national forest land. And so it's working with like attuning to nature, or attuning to, the stars, to the electric universe. So that's a breathwork training for facilitators. You know me, Casey. I'm like, to the very core, I'm a teacher. I'll never not be a teacher. I'm always teaching something. I also really love teaching. If I have a modality that I think is good, I like teaching other people, because, I can work with a few individuals, but if I can work with other people that are going to work with other people, this big ripple. So that moves me. So I've got somatic euphoria, and I have another one in the fall, I believe. I haven't set the dates for that one yet. I also have Spellbound. Spellbound is like a leadership course that has to do with like waking up out of the hypnotic rhythm of life and waking up in consciousness. So that is a course that works with breath work and subtle medicines, and works with like waking up to the hegemony, the hegemonic spells that we're all under, that create. I feel like I want to swear. I'm going to try not to do that, but that create the effery that we're living in right now. So so that's Spellbound. That's a 3-month container. So yeah, that's what I have going on right now.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, I think this topic is so timely right now, right? The most timely of recent years, with the change in the energy. Those of you who are tapped into the astrology right now, we're in times of rapid change, and it's going to take our breath away, like literally at times. And so I really feel like, in addition to earth medicine practice, one of the most profoundly supportive practices is learning self-regulation. And I think the breath is something we all have access to. It's freely available, and really tapping into learning how to breathe, learning how to breathe through our noses again when we sleep, adjusting our posture for optimizing our breath. Like, all of those things are so small and so simple, but I think they can be really meaningful in this time of change. Yeah. I'd love for you guys to share your websites and your socials and all those things. We will drop all those in the show notes, but we always have people who are listening while they're driving. So for those listeners, can you share your website and the best place to find you online? Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah. My website is Sarah Hope Coaching. It's really easy. I've been told, somebody types that in, it comes right up. So, that's where you can sometimes find things. I'm updating it this afternoon. Actually, that's my next appointment, is going to my web person to update it. So everything that I just talked about will be on there. I guess I'm on Substack a lot. I can be found at the Wild Feminine Field Notes. And if you want to know what's in my heart, like hop on my Substack, because you'll hear more from me than you may want to. But all my insights, I release about an essay a week, based on, it's my reflections of the world and the wild feminine. And so, find me on Substack. I'm on the other things, but the meta things, I'm not super moved by them, but I will answer you if you do try to find me there. So, but yeah.
We all relate. Yeah.
And if you're in Colorado, I have people who hear me on podcasts that are coming through Colorado, and sometimes I can get them in for a session. So this happens quite a bit. So if you're coming through Colorado, I live in Colorado Springs, which is an hour and a half south of Denver. And I love to work with people. My office is very close to a spot where we can be in nature. So I like to work with people in nature a lot. So if you're in my area, definitely come find me.
Beautiful. Thanks. Victoria, how about you?
I'm on all the socials, including YouTube, Victoria Lee Starr, 2 E's, 2 R's. That's my website. Also try to keep it all coherent. LinkedIn, all the places. So I'm not on Substack yet, but that is something that's hanging out in the back. But I do have something that's magical coming up. And it is a relaunch of my podcast that'll happen in May. So I'm so super excited for that. And if you're in the Arizona area, I'm feeling that I'm landing here in this area. So that will be a new change in my life. And I'm open to always traveling to wherever somebody is on the West Coast. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I highly, highly recommend Victoria's podcast. I've had the pleasure of being on it. So Victoria's a little bit of a spiritual outlaw. So she always has some edgy topics and spicy conversations. I highly, highly recommend checking it out. So thank you. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, people can find me mainly on Instagram, Kyle Buller _. And then you can find Psychedelics Today wherever you listen to podcasts, Psychedelics Today across all platforms. Usually kind of creating more content over there than some of my personal stuff, since Vital, our training program, and Psychedelics Today takes most of my life up. But if you do want to reach out to me personally, I am starting to kind of expand into more, coaching. I have a therapy practice here in Colorado, and my personal site, settingsunwellness.com. So you can check me out there.
Beautiful. I love following Kyle too, because he always has great snowboarding footage.
try to switch it up every once in a while. Then, you bring up Meta, and then I get worried. I keep seeing all these people getting banned again for stuff. I'm like, oh no, is the AI moderation getting worse again? Because for those of us in this world, it is tricky to make social media content around this stuff, show what we're into, because they can take it away at any moment. So it is important to find us elsewhere off the platforms and connect, because we're also at the hands of these social media giants, and they can just take it away from you at any moment.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Not everybody knows that. And that's a big inspiration of why we do the podcast, because we're free to share freely and openly with each other. We can share whatever we think. We can curse if we want to curse. We can talk about the subjects that really, really impact and are meaningful to people's real lived lives. So, Thank you for speaking to that. And thank you all for being here on this subject. I'm really happy to share this subject with everybody. I know this topic will be very timely and meaningful to our community. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Casey. I'm grateful.
Thanks, Casey.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be back in just a couple weeks. All right. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Ready to take the next step? Please visit us online at microdosingforhealing.com. There you'll find lots of information about our global community, professional training programs, and upcoming immersions. See you there.